Friends, welcome to Coffee with Gaz. I'm here sipping coffee, and today I'm going to be discussing the case for food rules, and in some sense, the case for being wrong about nutrition, okay? And obviously, I and we at Triad are, quite passionate about trying to pursue truth and trying to, be scientific in the way that we think and put out information that is truthful and useful and can be tested and is refutable, etc. They're all the things that we're interested in. But at the same time, we're also interested in helping people and making sure that people get good outcomes and not just necessarily win arguments, okay? That's important. And that's going to be my preface to this discussion is, Nassim Taleb, my favourite author of the Inserto books, back there, the black and gold, handsome books. He says, or one of the things that he has said is, you don't want to win an argument, you want to win, okay? And it's a very simple phrase, and it's like, yeah, well, obviously, but not so obvious in the way that people actually behave, okay? And I want to kind of illustrate this by giving you the example of the way that people discuss nutrition on the internet. So, if you were to go online on Instagram, you could find people who are quite scientific in their thought process, who are basically behaving in a manner that only incentivizes trying to win an argument as opposed to actually winning, okay? And I've definitely fallen into this trap myself. An example of this would be something like a discussion of, let's say, dietary sugar, okay? So if you're thinking about sugar in the diet and the types of foods that sugar tends to be contained in high quantities, they tend to be foods that incentivize or lead to high caloric intakes, okay? So generally leads to increases in caloric intake if you're consuming lots of, let's say, donuts and sweets and chocolates, etc. And yes, the sugars come with dietary fat and other flavorings, etc. that incentivize higher caloric intake, but the point there being that if someone is generally thinking about, right, I want to reduce the amount of sugar that I consume in my diet, that food rule, although not necessarily necessary for someone who's trying to lose body weight, it still incentivizes or leads to the second order effect of reducing caloric intake. So the kind of scientifically minded person, or the person who's maybe on the internet, playing the science game, trying to win arguments rather than trying to win, what they're going to say is, that's dumb, you don't need to cut sugar out of your diet, you can lose weight eating sugar, it doesn't really matter what foods you eat once you reduce your calories. And that's true. The thing is, that's true, and illustrating that in certain contexts is important, okay? An example of that would be when someone's food rules or over-restriction or orthorexia, you could say, an obsession with kind of clean eating, when someone takes that to the extreme, to the point where it's compromising their psychological and social well-being, that's a good time for intervention in terms of saying, look, that you can still maintain good health, good body composition while including some of these foods in your diet, right? So that's important to kind of get that message out to some people, at which point the behavior of reducing dietary sugar or cutting out certain foods has come to the point of potentially being pathological in some way, okay? So it's compromising their quality of life more than it's supporting their quality of life. However, that's not the case for everyone. And I think that if we basically just go, all out in terms of saying that there are no food rules, nothing matters, just hit your calories, that's a very reductionistic stance that actually ignores what happens in the real world. Because what happens in the real world when people adopt these kind of food rules a lot of the time, like for example, if I was to say to myself, or if I was to just believe that, nutrition is all about food quality, and if I just eat lean meats, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, fruits, etc., if that was my belief, that I needed to eat that, and that's the secret to health, and that's all that you can eat, it incentivizes me eating a high quality diet with plenty of with adequate nutrition that's very satiating, and that leads to a spontaneous reduction in my caloric intake without me knowing anything about calories. So I don't know anything about my FitnessPal, I don't know anything about calories in, calories out, I don't know anything about the macronutrient composition of the diet. All I know is that they're my food rules, I eat mostly those foods, and I seem to be in good health, my body composition seems to be in a good place, and boom, that's kind of it, okay? So that's basically the case that I'm trying to make, that you can live by food rules that are not necessarily truthful or necessary in all contexts, that still allow you to win. Okay, that's a really important thing, because I think we're losing that. I think that we're losing that in the kind of contemporary nutrition discussion, and that's partly because you're trying to, like, a lot of the kind of science-based people are trying to battle people who are taking basically food rules to the extreme and not just using them for, you could say, a utilitarian purpose, where I'm saying that you can use these rules to incentivize behaviors that lead you to win. Whereas another group of people are using these food rules basically to win arguments and trying to make them look like they are actually truthful in all contexts. An example of that would be someone who's maybe a strong proponent of, let's say, the vegan diet, or low carbohydrate diet, or ketogenic diet, any basically like really strong restrictive nutritional ideology. When you start to kind of venture into those circles, yes, you're going to have people who say, oh, I just eat a low carbohydrate diet because it allows me, to manage my overall nutrition, I feel healthier, but I'm sure other people can eat some carbohydrates and be fine. And you'll find people who say, I'm vegan because, look, the overconsumption of animal foods doesn't seem to be too healthful for me. I'm sure some people can eat them, and to be honest, the ethical thing, it doesn't work for me, and I'm concerned about the environment, etc. But look, I don't judge other people. Okay, so you'll find proponents like that who are a little bit more reasonable, a little bit more moderate in the way that they hold their perspectives. However, you'll also find people who are very much on the extremes, where you'll have vegans who say that you're basically a murderer if you eat any animal foods, and you're the most unethical person on the planet. And you actually are damaging your health every time you eat a bite of meat, or you consume any dairy, and that this is killing you, and blah blah blah. And the same thing with the low carbohydrate crowd. They'll say things like that fruit and vegetables are harmful. You find that at the extremes, and they'll tell you that you shouldn't be eating fruits and vegetables, whole grains are killing people, etc. So you do find people who are taking those, let's say, nutrition rules, and they're kind of holding them up as these ideologies and making it out that they've basically found the all-encompassing truths of the nutrition universe. Okay, so that's basically what people end up combating then, on the kind of science-based side of things, where people will start to say things related to there being no bad foods, and you don't need to go on a low carb diet. All you need to do is track your calories, track your macros, eat plenty of fruits and vegetables, etc. But you can still eat donuts, you can still eat sweets, you can still eat chocolates, etc. And basically trying to come up with like all of the truths that are scientifically kind of proven, you could say, or the current scientific consensus on nutrition for health, nutrition for body composition, etc. But the important thing to recognize is that, like, debating the merits of lower or higher carbohydrate diets, or how much meat exactly should we have in the diet, etc. Like, they're matters like kind of scientific interest, but the important thing is that that's for people who are trying to win arguments. That's for people who are trying to, they're winning arguments, they're seeking truth, they're trying to combat pseudoscience, etc. But that's not necessarily what you need to do. And I think that's important, because as an individual, like, when you're not thinking about your role as someone who's educating others or is trying to, really seek the truth. If you're thinking about the role of nutrition in your life, you're probably thinking about its ability to improve your health, give you energy throughout the day, improve your body composition so that you're in good shape, reduce risk of disease, that fits in with health obviously, but also, obviously allow you to be psychologically healthy and maintain your social health and enjoy your food, etc. So that's a different set of values and a set of goals to the people who are arguing about nutrition on the internet, about the real nuances that you don't necessarily need to be aware of. So that is the purpose of this video, to get you guys to realize that you can believe in and obey certain food rules, and that doesn't make you a bad person, and it doesn't make you unscientific, okay? Because, like, one of the things that you see when you look at, obviously from looking at the real world, but also from looking at research, is that when people consume more processed foods, highly processed foods, or ultra processed foods, when people eat higher amounts of those in the diet, they tend to eat more calories, they tend to gain more weight, okay? Very simple. Now, it is true that you could eat those highly processed foods and just manage your overall caloric intake and not gain weight, but that's not the behavior that's incentivized, and it's not what happens spontaneously without you trying to rigidly manage everything. And in the real world, when we think about nutrition, the goal is not to have to rigidly manage everything. The goal is for us to be able to kind of eat, comfortably, eat our couple of meals per day, and for basically our health to kind of be taken care of as a result of that, and not to have to put in too much additional energy. Okay, so like personally, I don't track my calories, and I haven't really done so for a couple of years, because I eat a diet that basically allows me to maintain my body weight or lose body weight or gain body weight depending on the goal, by modifying certain, you could say food rules, but they're not necessarily food rules, because obviously I'm someone who, I understand that I can eat chocolate as part of my diet and still, be in good health and good body composition, etc. But I recognize that, by having foods that are more satiating, more vegetables, more protein, whole grains, etc., by having these foods in my diet in higher quantities, that it basically leads to the second order effect of me reducing my calories because I'm more satiated in response to those foods. Also, obviously, that I'm able to satisfy my nutrient needs without having to eat a higher level of calories. So for example, if you're consuming more highly processed foods that maybe don't contain much of whatever nutrient you happen to be interested in, then it's going to require more overall calories for you to be able to hit certain nutrient targets. Micronutrients aside, an easy one to discuss there is dietary protein. So if you're consuming, a diet that's, full of just like you're eating breakfast cereals and you're eating kind of cereal bars and lots of snack foods and highly processed foods, what you end up doing is consuming a lot of calories, but you don't necessarily consume enough dietary protein, or you mightn't hit enough dietary fiber, and as a result, number one, you're not very satiated, but number two, you're not actually hitting the nutrient targets that are required for you to have good body composition and have good health. So that's something that's really worth understanding. I'm not sure if it's coming across as clear, but it's something that kind of makes sense in my head, that you can use food rules and even be some bit dogmatic at times and improve your own health and basically win, because you're not the type of person that's trying to win an argument. So that's what I would say to people, people will turn around and say things like, oh, you don't need to implement fasting, just control your calories. But if someone turns around to me and says, I fast for 2 days every week, and that allows me to manage my diet perfectly at all other times, then that is all that matters, because that is you winning. That's you winning. It doesn't matter about winning an argument. You might, some smart ass will turn around to you and say, oh, but you could just, eat less every day and get the same results. But you know what works for you. And that is the important thing to get here, is that trying to extrapolate what works for you out to a rule for everyone, that's the wrong approach. Okay, so that's not how to go about things, and that's venturing into the territory of winning arguments. That's venturing into the territory of basically taking the focus off of what's working for you and trying to generalize it to everyone. That's not your goal, because all that matters for you as an individual listening to this video is that you are getting the results that you actually need out of what you're doing. Okay, and that's the important disconnect, because I think sometimes what people that get into maybe the scientific approach to nutrition a little bit more, sometimes you get people that basically just discount any n=1 outcomes. So n=1 meaning that, my response as one individual to a given nutrition intervention. So from a scientist's perspective, that n=1 isn't that valuable, because it's not generalizable and it doesn't inform the rule, whereas the scientist is trying to, figure out, let's say for nutrition policy, they're trying to figure out, okay, what works on a population level. Whereas for you as an individual, all that really matters for you is like, all right, what are my outcomes? Because if someone says to you, right, eat a diet that, is lower in fat, let's say, like that's the food rule that you're given, but you're like, man, this isn't doing it for me. Like, doesn't suit my preferences. I prefer other foods. Maybe a lower carbohydrate approach might be better for me. And you find that that's the only thing you can stick to. Then it's really hard to turn around and say, hey, you probably shouldn't do that. And of course, there are some nuances there in that it's much easier to self-assess changes in body composition and performance and like your general sense of health and well-being. So you can assess all of those things and get your n=1 outcomes really easily. But where it gets a little bit more difficult, obviously, is if if a diet happens to be working for body composition, but your blood lipids, let's say, or lipoproteins, or whatever way you want to think about that. Okay, so obviously there's a difference between the lipoproteins that carry your cholesterol in your blood and the actual cholesterol itself, etc. That's for another time. If you're thinking about the way that adversely affects that potentially, and that could potentially adversely affect cardiovascular risk, then that's something obviously that is a little bit more nuanced, and you can't necessarily sense in terms of your N=1 outcomes. So there are cases there where you might think that your nutrition is going really well through your simple food rules, but then you go to your doctor and they say, hey, your LDL, it's not looking too good, it's way above the recommended range, and you might need to make some changes to your diet then that may not have been intuitive based on what you felt from a well-being perspective. So yeah, they're just some things to think about. Again, what I am not advocating for here is that we all become dogmatic and use specific nutrition rules where they are not true or not necessary. So especially if you're a trainer or a nutritionist or anything like that, I'm not advocating that you basically just start lying to people so that you can get them to do certain things. What I am suggesting is that there's a difference between what allows you to win and what allows you to win arguments. And if you're trying to win, you're trying to improve your health, you're trying to improve your performance, you're trying to improve your body composition, then sometimes simple rules can literally be enough. So for you trying to maybe lose some body weight, it could be as simple as saying to yourself, yeah, I only allow myself a drink once a week or once every 2 weeks. Like someone could turn around again and say, but you could consume it every day and still lose weight, just track your calories. But that, right, firstly, that's maybe not the best thing for health. But also, well, when I drink alcohol, it incentivizes me to eat more calories, so I'm not going to do that, okay? And someone saying that, but just track your calories. You know how something affects your behavior, so pay attention to that. Similarly, you could be saying to yourself, I'm going to make sure that I don't eat, let's say, more than 100 calories worth of chocolate per day, okay? Could you consume 300 calories worth of chocolate and still lose weight? Sure you could. But again, it's a hyper-palatable food, it's very tasty, it's very easy to overconsume, and as a result, it's likely to lead to spontaneous increases in caloric intake, independent of any other considerations you might have about health. So purely from a body composition perspective, it can incentivize you to overeat. So yeah, they're the types of things that I want you guys to try and have a think about. The difference between trying to win and trying to win arguments, the difference between being maybe a scientific thinker who's trying to put out information for the masses versus maybe a coach who's trying to help an individual versus the individual themselves who simply wants to get some sort of specific outcome, okay? Because I think things get mixed up. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in trying to basically combat or counter some of the pseudoscience that we forget that the individual at the receiving end of the information is actually who we care about. And ultimately, if something is improving my well-being and my quality of life, like, I don't really care if it works for you or not. No offense, all I care is that it works for me. And it's important to remember that, because we definitely do forget that, and sometimes we just brush people aside and make them feel stupid. I've seen cases where someone says, fasting totally changed my life. When I started fasting a couple of days per week, or maybe a 16/8 structure or whatever, it totally changed my health, it totally changed my body composition, etc. And the only response to that individual is fair play, that's amazing, respect, okay? That's the appropriate response there. The appropriate response there is not to say, oh, but you could have just tracked your calories, that's so dumb, why didn't you just do that? I can't believe you believe in fasting, because that person doesn't care about that. They don't care about whether it works for you. All they care is that, hey, I lost 100 pounds, I'm no longer insulin resistant, or my insulin resistance has improved, and my blood glucose is in a good place, my blood pressure is on point, my lipids are on point, boom, cardiovascular risk reduced, quality of life improved, feeling healthier, looking better. That's what that person cares about. So yeah, remember that, guys. And yeah, I won't go on any further than this, because I don't want any of these videos to be really much more than 20 minutes. But hopefully there's something there that is worth thinking about. How much you get from this video or how you're able to think about it will depend on where you're coming from. So if you're someone that's maybe a coach yourself and you've come across this, the kind of science-based revolution within the fitness industry and people trying to be evidence-based, etc., I think this will be relatable. If you're someone that's just coming into the fitness industry, maybe you're like, oh damn, I didn't know that I could eat sugar and still lose weight, and I might have just ruined that for you, or maybe improved your life, I don't know. But yeah, that's the point, guys, that don't just dispense with food rules totally and assume that people are dumb for having certain food rules, because it's about the incentives, it's about the second order effects, it's about how it affects things down the line, rather than your kind of so-called objective analysis of someone's calories, that saying that people need to track their calories in order to improve their health, like that's just not necessarily true, and I think it's the wrong level of analysis. So yeah, and as I said at the beginning, guys, I'm not necessarily saying that everyone needs to believe that there are good and bad foods and that you become immediately healthy once you start to consume some chocolate. It's not what we want, and as I alluded to, these things can become pathological, and that's one of the important reasons that we do have to combat that. Okay, so food rules do need to be combated, and they do need to be challenged in some cases, especially where they're taken away from someone's quality of life. So if someone is feeling terribly guilty and depressed every time they have a bit of chocolate, then clearly we need to address that, and that's something someone might need help with, in terms of like working with someone who specializes in eating disorders, a psychologist, a counselor, nutritionist with special interest, dietitian with special interest, etc. So yeah, definitely not brushing that stuff aside, and hopefully you can see maybe some of the reasonable conversations that are to be had in this area, as opposed to just the strong beliefs, because there are strong beliefs on every side of this discussion whereby someone will stand by their food rule and tell everyone else that they're idiots. And then you'll have maybe people who are more scientifically minded, and they'll say, you're all idiots for believing in any food rules. And then you'll have people who say, it's everyone has disordered eating, tracking calories is disordered, believing in any food rules is disordered, and again, it's all looking at things from a different lens. And I think if you can try and see what each person is trying to say in each respective camp, and understand the different incentives for each individual in their approach. For example, the scientist trying to design policy versus the individual trying to improve their body composition, I think you can start to see why people do get a bit polarized in these discussions. So yeah, I hope that's helpful, guys, and that's another episode of Coffee with Gaz, in which I did not even consume my coffee. As always, please feel free to drop any suggestions for videos down below. Be more than happy to record anything that you suggest, and I will be back at you again next Friday, if not sooner, with more videos. And just an announcement on that as well, I know some of you will have received this through your email, but in the morning time, at least a few mornings a week, what I'm going to be doing is basically sending out an email to our email newsletter, our email list, that is going to be linked in the description box below if you're watching this on YouTube. And basically what that contains is it's going to be a post most mornings, or a video like this if I have a Coffee with Gaz video up, and basically it's just some bit of information that's hopefully going to be thought-provoking to kind of put you on track for the day. Read it with your morning coffee, take you 5 minutes, and then you're on the right track. And of course you can just ignore it if you want, and that's absolutely cool. But yeah, get involved, email newsletter, subscribe below, and of course subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't as well, because that really helps us, and share the video if you found it helpful, and I will speak to you guys again soon. And remember that it is in fact too easy, and of course be happy.